You're listening to Music Tectonics.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Music Tectonics podcast. I am your irregular host, Tristra Newyear Yeager, filling in for Dimitri. And today I have with me a really cool guest. I'm really excited to share this conversation with you. His name is Andres Lauer. He is the founder and CEO of Five Vectors, a startup in Berlin that operates on the intersection of gaming and music in some really interesting ways. So I'm really hoping that some of my music friends out there will benefit from this conversation and hearing a little bit about how gaming works, how the culture operates, and some exciting lessons I think the music business could learn from the world of gaming and esports. So, Andres, to kick us off here, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background in the music business because it's extensive and relevant probably to a lot of our conversation that's going to follow. So, if you don't mind introducing yourself a little bit more and telling us about how you got started in music.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast. So my name is Andres, and I'm more or less the stereotypical music industry guy. I would say I started very early as a music producer and engineer that turned into a manager because I realized very quickly that I'm not as good as my friends were when it comes to music and music production. So I kind of switched roles and started doing management and publishing, and then I founded a small publishing vertical within the company. I took that out and later worked with the BMG and with Imagem Music, which later became Bicycle Music. And they sort of took my catalog in, and I went on to work for Universal Music and worked in the European office in Berlin as an advisor to the CEO of Europe, which is also a board member of UMG, and I helped them with establishing an investment strategy, establishing corporate development strategy across all territories in Europe. And while doing that, I kind of identified a couple of fields that I thought were very interesting that were going to shape or reshape the music industry a little bit. And that was the first one that I identified was influencer marketing, because I realized that a lot of, like, let's say, um, 35% of the spend of a major company goes into marketing, and that mainly into advertising. So understanding that influencer marketing is going to be something that we can heavily sort of use for our artists, but also maybe monetize some of the newcomers that we have through that lane, was something that we looked into. And one of the other things was esports, because we saw was that there is a whole new demographic that sort of where their heroes are completely digital, in the sense of that are like action figures within games. And second to that is that there's a new breed of athletes being born that interact with those kind of games in front of massive audiences. So we knew that this is a form of entertainment at the end of the day, because for us, pop culture consists of several pillars of sports, of music, of film, and of design and fashion. And we knew that like music has always been the strongest one when it comes to sort of leaning forward and showing the way to all other pillars. So for us, it was clear that there's going to be a big intersection between gaming culture and esports and music. So we started to tap into that. And while I tapped into that, I was like, okay, if I do that for UMG, I can also do this for myself, and in a way that I can really sort of in like shape the industry to a certain degree into a direction that I always wanted the industry to go. And that's very tough to do from inside of such a big house like to UMG. And that's why I dropped out, and I partnered up with Wasae, who was my partner and co-founder, who was the global head of talent at the ESL, the biggest esports brand. And we founded Five Vectors sort of as the first real love baby of the music and gaming industry, to give birth to a platform that enables independent musicians and to find new monetizing lanes, and also that gives, hopefully in the future, gamers a better experience than the existing one.
That's great. And I just speaking about this experience, I think music, it would be really helpful just to give a general snapshot of how music weaves into games and gameplay. I think I think a lot of the folks in the music world maybe imagine it's something kind of like sync, or they've heard about the virtual concerts in some gaming environments, but they may not know about all the ways that the sonic world of games is really important to gamers. So I'd love if you could give us a little bit more insight into that to start us out.
Yeah, I would love to. So you said it very right. So it's like usually how the music industry sees the gaming space is as a sync opportunity. So what we all know is like it pretty much started with, let's say, Tetris. It had this iconic sound design that we all remember. So it really tied us into the game. That was like pro. That was music done for the game itself. But then maybe like in the last decade, the sort of the most synonymous for gaming music was maybe FIFA because it had a dedicated soundtrack. So a lot of people were like, that's actually a great platform for the artist to be featured in. And there could also be a monetary upside by, EA, the studio behind FIFA, paying a sync fee for that track. So this is how usually like publishers and labels tackle that space. It's like, oh, there's an audience. I can give you my the music, and you guys can put it into the game. And in exchange for that, we can get a fee, and our artists can get massive exposure. But that's not where we want to tap into. What we have seen is there's a new kind of a gaming revolution right now going on, especially for younger kids, because these kids grow up and this gaming environment is it's native to them. It's how we see it is usually the gaming experience is an extension to our lives. For this new generation, it is pretty much their life. This is why esports in that demographic is growing stronger than traditional sports, because this new generation feels so comfortable in this digital environment that they want also their sports and their competitive events to be part of that. And how we see it is that these guys or this generation, this demographic, is they want music as a part of the social experience to be in those places. Right as when I was young and I grew up in this late rap sort of generation of the 2000s, it was for me it was we dressed like the our idols. It was very obvious for everyone from the outside space that we listened to rap. This is pretty much gone by now. This is completely diluted. You cannot tell what someone is listening to just by the looks. But music always had this very, very strong social component that handed out identification to a certain group of people. And we strongly believe that this is going to go. That we're going to go back into this direction, especially in the virtual world where you can wear everything and look like anything. Literally, like you can even look like an extraterrestrial life form. But music is something that gives you a certain identifier. So if you're playing a video game and you're able to attribute music to your persona, to your character, to your gameplay, to your world that you are in, it gives you a certain color. And this is what people want. And this is where we actually see the biggest business upside is how can we build an infrastructure that enables that people can take music, interact with music in a more social way in a gaming experience, and how can we make this infrastructure available to independent artists and to independent labels at this stage of the company.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it kind of feeds into something that I've been thinking a lot about, Andres, in part because I've gotten a chance to talk with you and Wasae a bit about this world. But it seems to me that the music business and even in its most advanced forms of sort of what a lot of people call monetizing fandom, which I think is a really unfortunate turn of phrase. Because that's like taking someone's heart and soul and saying, how do we turn this into cold hard cash? I think if we not to be too semantic about it, but I think if we shifted the way we talked about it, we'd get farther with this problem. But that aside, I think games have a lot to teach the music business about how to do this. And in some ways, we've been really limited by older formats for engaging for fans engaging with their favorite artists and having some kind of monetary side to that. Like I'm thinking about some of the really popular apps in China where you can tip people, or some of the streaming platforms like Twitch, where there's some other tippable things, some live streaming concerts, etc. I wanted to hear your perspective and kind of just in a more speculative, fun sci-fi kind of way. Like, where would you love to see music technology going that would unlock some kind of new layers for people, some new ways for artists and fans to interact and exchange value, so to speak, and ways that aren't based on older forms like throwing a tip in the tip jar or paying for a concert ticket or buying a piece of merchandise. What do you think? Do you think there are some new forms that have yet to be really explored that you'd love to see people thinking more about?
You mean new content forms or new interactive forms?
Yeah, yeah, new interactive forms. I think there's a lot of creativity in the gaming space um, around this kind of interaction. There's a lot of really crazy virtual economies that like can leap up from, people trading their own, personally bred digital warthogs and or, what those kind of crazy things that can happen. And I feel like none of that's really been unlocked for music in any way, shape, or form. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that or um, well, yeah, what your take is on where you imagine the future of this kind of relationship going.
I think that what you said, you already touched upon the whole topic. Is like um, maybe to put it into a broader scope is a lot of people talk about virtual reality by now, and that there's a huge possibility, like a huge opportunity for music in virtual reality and maybe mixed reality. But what we do believe that, and we see that coming together. But the problem is more it's more about a timing issue. So I think that for virtual reality, the penetration of the technology is not there yet. So the price point for virtual reality headsets and technology is still very, very high. It's not comparable to like an Xbox One, let's say, which now just sold on the Black Friday for $9.99 with two controllers. But if you want to get an Oculus Rift or maybe something from like a HoloLens or whatever, you probably pay over $1,000 for the whole infrastructure. So there's no mass market yet because the price point is still too high. It needs to drop over time, and it will drop over time, so that it will be a sort of an item or an entertainment form that can sort of have a higher penetration rate across the country. Um, but what we do see is that the first layer, where people actually want to interact with music in a different way, is exactly the layer that you just touched upon. Is what we call this gaming, this micro economies within game specific environments. So if you are, let's say, if you are in a specific store, you have a specific currency, and you can buy specific virtual items. Is the question that we ask ourselves is like, how can music play a vital role in that certain economy? And it's not only like how can we sell maybe music into that space, but how can we implement mechanics around music that people are willing to, or that are fun to engage with, and that people want to engage with, so that people sort of maybe want to applaud digitally for something, and or they want to push the information that there's a new like track out or new artist and interesting one, and they want to push within the gaming environment that information to their community or to their peer. How would a business model on top of that look like, and how would the interaction look like? And these are kind of the questions that we are asking ourselves. But what we see is that, based on what I said earlier, on this very young demographic that is growing up natively within these gaming environments, and within a completely virtual space, is that these guys have completely abandoned the thought of owning music. I don't know if you remember, there was a big discussion when streaming came up of, okay, but this is a rent model, right? Like stream Spotify, the DSPs, this is an access driven model. And I remember that the big question was like, okay, you're not going to own any more music. You're not going to have it on your hard drive, because it was such an essential point back in the days that you had this vinyl collection. It made you into something. You were that a guy if you had this 12, 15, vinyl piece. And then later, when I grew up very, very early in school, it was more about, who had the most MP3s on his hard drive. And we kind of developed into such an access model. But in the new model, what we see is that people actually want to contribute, and want to interact with a piece of music. And I think around this, there's a business model. I'm totally with you. It's like monetizing fandom literally sounds like you want to take an individual and squeeze as much dollars out of that as you can. But I think how we should tackle it is more like, how can we create an infrastructure where people can, tip a song, maybe give the lyrics of a song, maybe put it into a nice visual, and have it implemented into the game, have it somehow attached to the visual persona in the game, so that they can showcase their affiliation towards that artist. And if you look at something like Patreon, it's like it's a step in the right direction, but it still doesn't feel like it's something that what I believe, especially this younger demographic, is going to do because it's still completely detached from the gaming environment, and B, it's a donation system that sort of doesn't add to your social virtual persona because it's completely detached from that. So if you look at the Chinese market, Tencent and NetEase, you can see that they have perfectionized this model. Tencent's annual revenue from music is 30% subscription and 70% is, I think they call it music entertainment services, which is very much the bucket of tipping for songs, gifting songs, unlocking certain rewards or like badges within the apps that you have. So all of these, what we call just microtransactions, is basically what accounts for 70% for that for the Tencent streaming service and QQ. And the interesting part here is that these guys are profitable. And, if you compare it against Spotify, which is like socially not a very interactive model, there's certain layers why probably the Chinese market is earlier than ours, and I think that it's because they didn't really had a desktop age. They went straight into the mobile age, similar to, let's say, Brazil. Brazil is pretty much also like was driven by a mobile revolution, where the price tier for phones dropped very very quickly, and people could just purchase like phones and then stream music on YouTube over Wi-Fi and whatever. So they got conditioned to that behavior very very quickly. This is why a lot of people believe that the Chinese model is not very applicable to us. But we don't believe that. Actually, we see the opposite. This is why we look so much into esports, because people in the esports environment already have that are sort of conditioned in that space. Like they want to, showcase their affiliation towards a certain team. And in the future, we believe also towards a certain artist, a band, a genre, or some item music related. And it's up to us to create these formats and these opportunities so that these guys can do that. This is why we're building this is why the technology that we're building circles around the idea of, if you're an artist, what would your virtual merchandise be if we sort of detach ourselves from the notion that merchandise is fashion? What would it be if you go back back in the days and you had like 7 inches and stuff like that on a concert that you can only buy at a concert? What could it be digitally, and how would it be showcased? Like that's like one of the main questions that we have. Is like, how can you look into not only new formats but more into like new bundles? Like, what would you like to purchase as a fan digitally if you can somehow attach it towards your gaming persona? So if you're playing Fortnite or if you're playing any other game, you would have the ability, or maybe on Twitch you would have the ability to showcase that, okay, he has the, I don't know, Frank Ocean pack, and he has the, this and that, maybe, sound attached to his character, or he has this, I don't know, maybe library or this lyric or whatever it would be. Maybe further down the line, also like a skin. But this is like the main question that we're asking. So we're not coming from the angle of, okay, can we get our songs into a game? This is always what we are asked of a lot. It's like, okay, so you guys cracked the nut of like how to sync, mass sync music into video games, and we're not coming from that angle. We're coming from the angle of looking actually at the virtual space, trying to understand how this new generation actually wants music to play a vital role in the virtual environment, and we're trying to find the right format and the right technology to deploy those formats.
That's really, really cool. One thing that you touched on, Andres, was that what music works in what game. How do I get my music into a game? One area I know you guys have focused a lot on is understanding the culture within different game spaces. So I was wondering if we could, and data is of course an issue that's very, very exciting for a lot of people in the music business. So I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about what kind of data points play into figuring out what digital merchandise might potentially work, what kind of music genres people are excited to associate themselves with within gameplay. What kind of data points do you look at, and what's really important and what is less important in the realm of data when we're talking about gaming and music?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, would love to talk about that. I mean, I'm going to be very transparent here. It's like, my partner Wasae, he is pretty much the gaming industry. He knows everything about it. You could wake him up at 3 a.m. in the morning and ask him a random question about the industry or about a game, and he would probably able to answer that. So working with him and then, starting to harvest data to try to understand which kind of musical genre works in which game was very eye-opening to me. Because from the music industry side, there's a lot of like stereotypes that we had, or also that I had as well, was more like, okay, gaming music is probably electronic music. There's a lot of talk about why this could, why sort of electronic or EDM is so close to gaming music. It ranges from it was developed at the same period of time to the first gaming generation was conditioned by EDM because they also like grew up in that age, or it's just technically very close. But all of that, what we can say is we can pretty much demystify that, is that it is not that simple. Basically, what we are trying to do is we are aggregating right now over different outlets and initiatives that we have a variety of data points on a daily basis. So we're grabbing. I don't want to drop the wrong number, but I could say we're grabbing like a six-digit number of data points a day to try to understand a certain sort of code that I wrote down here in the office, which says the music, and then equals to us is the platform, the game, the demographic, the time, the format, and the type. And the type means for us if you're playing a game, if you're watching a game, or if you're watching a competitive game. And that's like the algorithm that we want to crack. And this is touching upon that topic. We already saw that EDM is not gaming music. The gaming culture and esports is becoming so big that it touches upon every single genre. So if you think about the NFL, there is no such thing as NFL music or football music. Let me say it like that. A lot of people think it's actually, very like rap or maybe like R&B or very modern music.
Or even, or but maybe, sort of what we, affectionately call butt rock in the US, sort of classic rock,
Yeah, this
style
is
rock.
this is what I actually
Yeah.
wanted to say, is that, but it's just very, very diverse. I remember Monday Night Football. I think Sheryl Crow sang sort of the Monday Night Football anthem for over 1.5 years, or maybe even for 2 seasons. So these kind of phenomena, so these kind of cultures are so big that they kind of inherit all the genres, and so it's more important for us to really understand. And this is more or less the tricky part. It's like, what kind of genre wants what kind of user in what kind of experience in what kind of format. So what kind of format I really mean, like, if you're playing a video game, music is enhances your experience, but it can't be the forefront. So if you're playing a game like Counter-Strike, you cannot listen to a song on on full volume, because you actually need to listen to the game. You listen, or in Fortnite, you listen to the steps of the other guy on the same kind of map, and who's trying to kill you. So you have to very, like, music can only be a layer next to that. So what we needed to do initially, we did a lot of research for that, is like trying to find opportunities where music could actually be played and in what kind of length. So we know now that in these kind of games, you can enhance the experience by adding musical bits. But initially, what we're doing right now is without vocals, because it could be too disturbing. And we know that it's usually in the range of 8 to max of 15 seconds. And it's usually in situations where the user is not highly focused. So usually in situations where he is rewarded something. So where he maybe like won a round, or when he's like respawning when he died. Because this is like a short slot where the user can actually have a short breath and be like, okay, on to the next one. So this is like the first layer that we're trying to understand based on the data, is like which game like opens up which opportunity. And the second one is, as said, how do we create, or which music are we going to deploy to which user in which game on which platform within which format. And this is not that easy as being like, okay, so Fortnite is actually, it's EDM because Marshmello played a concert in it. Actually, it's not that. I mean, we want to put in a report, and the first thing that we saw is like that. I'm going to give that away, is like that in Fortnite is the best example, because the game is so big. The first four artists were pretty much the identical ones that you had in the Spotify viral top 100. So there's a huge overlap of sort of what is working in pop culture right now on the DSPs with what people were listening to when playing Fortnite. So we just tried, and we know that because music is this dominant layer of pop culture within those pillars that is always, driving pop culture. But for us, obviously, it's important to be like, okay, if it's so big, what about country music? There has to be a demographic or a group or cohort within Fortnite somewhere on the platform that actually sort of wants to interact with like something like country music. So how can we contextualize these musical pieces and put it into the and deploy it in the right way to the right people? And I think that's like something that we're using our data management platform for, and we want to use it more heavily in the future so that we have a better experience for the user. And that maybe then way down in the future, they also have some serendipity, some sort of discovery to it so that we know, okay, if we push that kind of song to the user, even if he's not the typical I don't know jazz listener, he's probably going to enjoy it because it fits so much into the game and into the experience, and we can read this out of the data that we gathered over time.
That's really exciting. And I think this is a really important point for people in the music business to consider is that there may be more opportunities and ideas out there than they've suspected. If you could give somebody who maybe says has a catalog or is working with a bunch of artists one or two pieces of advice about how to approach the gaming world or gamers, esports, what would that be?
I think, and as this industry or like this culture is just at the very beginning, they can sniff out if someone just wants to take advantage of them very, very, very quick. It's again similar to me. I remember when like rap came up, like got big in Europe, and the scene was just small, and then it grew bigger, bigger, and people in the industry know if someone is not from the industry. So what I can tell to the kind of advice that I would give like an independent artist or an independent label would be, don't try and don't be the typical music industry guy and explain people how to do things. Start with listening and be very, very honest and be like, we don't know a lot about your industry, but we want to learn. And this is what we offer. We have great artists, we have great music. How could we do something that actually is interesting to you guys and engaging for your community? And not be the kind of music industry bully that comes in and is like, we can do sync, we can do here, we can do this and that, and yada yada. Just try to step back a bit because this industry is like it's very new. There's a lot of movement already, but the people who are in the industry have already been there for quite a while, and they will sniff out immediately if someone is just in for the quick buck or really wants to contribute to the journey. But if you're in to really like find your own lane, then you will find a lot of people who actually are willing to open up the door and let you in and try something new out with you. This is why we think we're in a very good space because um, the, especially the gaming partners that we work with from Ubisoft to League of Legends Japan, they are very, very sort of welcoming, and we're having a very honest conversation about music integration. And yeah, that's pretty much what I would tell them. Don't try to sell them. Just start with listening, probably.
That's a great idea and a very good advice. Very good life advice in general. Honestly, when you want to meet a new group of people and understand a new community. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk a little bit about this. I bet we could have an actual five hour long conversation, and maybe we'll have to revisit some new topics as things evolve, Andreas. But I really, really appreciate you coming on the podcast today. Before we head out, is there a place where interested listeners can find out more about Five Vectors and follow you and Wasae and your thoughts as things evolve? Because I think things are going to be evolving pretty quickly in your corner of the world.
Yeah, so basically, under Five Vectors, we operate two brands. So, but first of all, fivevectors.io. This is where sort of this is our homepage where you can get in touch with us if you have any questions. We have a Discord server that we use heavily as our Players Republic server, where we sort of always talk about music, gaming, and the business side of things. So, but basically, we operate two kind of brands. The first one is Tudex, which is a label brand focusing really on artists and how to create opportunities for them in this virtual worlds. And the other one is Players Republic, which is solely focused on the gaming experience, where we are trying to elevate the gaming experience by integrating music. And that being said, we have the server, the Discord server. You guys are more than happy to join there and get talk to us about anything you want. And on the other hand, if you just are interested more in the traditional music side, is 2dex, so a 2dex.gg. It's our label and you can shoot us a mail there. You can find the playlist that we're running on Spotify, the other outlets, and yeah, just get in touch. I think that's the easiest way.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Andres. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you all for listening to the Music Tectonics podcast. Check out our blog if you aren't already on our mailing list. Sign up because we will be announcing over time our upcoming conference in LA next year. So you want to follow us closely to keep on top of that and hear what's coming down the pike. So thanks, everybody. Have a great new year, and we'll catch you soon. Bye.
You're listening to Music Tectonics.